Welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Plek, and with me in studio once again is Machine Gun Nick.
Howdy.
And then also Chris Bowers, who is our resident Christian culture expert. Welcome, Chris Bowers, with a latest culture report. What do we got?
Thanks. Wow. I wouldn't go so far as to say
No, he's
Christian
a Christian
culture expert.
Yeah, you're
but,
definitely a Christian culture expert.
I do like to follow Big Eva, shorthand for the evangelical world.
I didn't even know Big Eva. I don't use that. Big Eva. I love that. Big evangelical. I love that. That's great. So give me the latest in Big Eva.
Industrial complex. So the other day you had, you guys were talking about the
Pastor
Driscoll,
Mo and me and Katie.
Katie, yes. Talking about the big controversy that went down at the Stronger Men's Conference with, which is at James River Church, which is an Assemblies of God denomination. Their Stronger Men's Conference is massive. It's been happening for years. If you're not familiar with Assemblies of God, it leans charismatic.
Not leans.
Charismatic.
It's fully charismatic.
Fully charismatic.
In fact, to be saved, I think you have to speak in tongues.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, very charismatic, which is interesting because Mark Driscoll, who got invited there, is not a charismatic.
Well, he is a mystic, though. So,
Yes.
So I mean,
Yeah.
he dabbles in the charismatic.
So, however, that entire blow up that went down that you all discussed.
Yeah. So let's review real quick. It was they brought a former stripper who now is a Christian.
Yes.
A male stripper. He rips off his shirt. He kind of does a striptease thing, climbs the pole, swallows a sword, and everyone cheers.
Yep. Super acrobatic. He's been on America's Got Talent multiple times.
Yeah, very athletic dude.
Probably the least culpable person in this entire thing,
right?
Because all he did was
do what he does,
and got paid for it. Kind of a weird thing at a men's event, I would say. A lot of people say, but okay,
whatever.
So then Mark gets up there the following day, and just as he says verbal processes out loud, and starts making all these comparisons to Old Testament. Jezebel's spirit,
Asherah
altars, Asherah poles, a lot of Old Testament
Asherah poles, it was like a fertility thing, so you kind of have, it would be very representative of having sex in some way.
Yeah. So when I first saw the original one, I was like, here we go, Mark Driscoll, old school.
Yeah.
Pastor Mo brought up the original old school controversy from when he was at Mars Hill.
Screaming at people about
screaming out, how dare you?
Yeah.
Which, hands down, my favorite sermon he's ever preached. I don't know what it is. When a pastor yells at me,
you love that.
I am exhorted to righteousness, and I love it.
Not everybody has that feeling.
Yeah.
That's good to know. I'm going to keep that in my toolbox.
So that takes place, and then he gets kicked off stage by Pastor John.
Yeah.
Then other stuff happens. He gets brought back up on stage, and they do this kind of quasi-apology where Pastor Mark just kind of says, hey, I should have talked about it with you before I just kind of went off.
Well, and
but
he just
doesn't actually apologize for it.
It's weird because he just randomly just starts talking. Yeah, anyway, sorry. So he gives a half apology.
He gives kind of a half apology. But there's some other weird things going on because Pastor John ends up making this, goes Old Testament, but then draws a connection to people like himself that are anointed by God, and one cannot criticize them. Criticizing leads to unbelief, and you're operating out of your flesh. And
so he probably was going with a Moses type mantle of when you murmured against Moses, you were murmuring against God's anointed, and therefore the earth swallows you up.
Yeah.
This is a Christian?
Yes.
They're calling themselves Christian?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, 100% they're calling
to
themselves Christian.
No, but there is a part of, like, if God has put you in the office of elder or leadership, you don't go criticize without having, and go to them personally with one or two witnesses or two or three witnesses.
Yep.
And that's an important aspect, right? Like,
is this Old Testament law?
No. Well,
that's
Matthew 18.
Matthew 18, where they talked. Pastor John mentioned this should have been in Matthew 18. There's different. I've seen different interpretations
Yeah.
out there because this was a very public thing, and therefore it's not. This person has sinned against you. Therefore, you go and talk to them in private.
Right.
They don't listen. Then you bring 2 or 3. Don't listen to them. Then you bring the elders. They don't listen to them. Then you bring the church, and then they go out. But that was private sin.
Right.
This was, hey, we did this on a public stage before a bunch of men. And Pastor Mark, in his initial
comments,
verbal processing,
verbal.
because I was going to say rebuke, but he
said
literally
it's
says,
not
this is not a rebuke, it's just an observation.
Yep.
So, kind of sketch, all sorts of things. Pastor John's got all sorts of controversies on his side as well. Pastor Mark's got the whole Mars Hill controversy. Pastor Lindell's known for things like regrowing toes.
Yeah.
And then
that's his
stating,
big thing.
I have proof, won't show you. Will not show the proof. He's heavily tied to Bethel. They share stages. I actually had this thought earlier today is, say, same situation,
Yep.
there's a Stronger Men's Conference, Pastor John invites you, I don't think you would ever have Pastor John preach from our pulpit. Would you, however, go and speak knowing that you have potentially a group that isn't your flock, but the opportunity to speak
I
to
would
them?
definitely be there, but I wouldn't make a big stink about whatever was going on. And I think that's just my personality. I probably would have been like, I would love to kind of preach the gospel. The reason why I know I do this is what I did back before I was a pastor. I was a Christian author, and I would go on charismatic TV shows. And man, Jesse Duplantis interviewed me one time, and he's about as charismatic and like out there and behind the stage. He's like, you want to know how to raise money? You got to build a builder. Buy an airplane. I was sitting there going, oh man, I hope, please Jesus, I don't want to get on the set with him and him lead the conversation in a direction of like the prosperity gospel, like this is how you get money. And I was just like slowly dying on the inside. But I felt like, oh no, I'm going to, if he goes that direction, I'm going to rebuke and go, that's not what I stand for or whatever. But then thankfully when he was nailed it. Like there was no problem. I got to talk about God as a perfect father. I got to show how Jesus showed up in combat. And I was able to speak really clear, the gospel in a way that I felt was very helpful to that audience.
Gotcha. So there is a line though that you would potentially push back and rebuke.
Oh yeah. If it was me personally, like if he was like, well, hey, if someone's not really saved if they don't speak in tongues, are they? And I'd be like, whoa, hey, no, actually, or like, that God really wants you to be wealthy and whatever. I'd be like, well, not necessarily. I'd push back.
So what if it's just events taking place? Some of the extracurricular events at the conference, maybe it's men. They're trying to get all kinds of men because that conference is targeted at bringing non-believers in. They bring in
The
Jello
stripper.
Wrestling.
Jello.
Something
weird.
that is not former male stripper, it's female
But
strippers.
but
It's-
why have people taking their clothes off at all? This is Christianity. Like
Right.
we try to be modest, upstanding citizens, right? Who even pay their taxes, pay to Caesar what's owed.
Yeah.
And now we're gonna go and people are gonna take our clothes off for our amusement at a I just couldn't.
Well,
Would you watch UFC?
Yeah, but that's different.
They actually had a boxing event there as
Yeah.
well. And so guys had their shirts off for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay, but you're boxing. Like
That's
right.
where.
I'm not saying, but to have a stripper.
Yeah, would I personally host that event? Heck no.
Right. I don't think that's
Obviously,
It's-
because
would
I
you-
don't think I'd
Yeah.
be here.
It's whether you would speak at that.
Yeah, I
time.
would.
And,
I
and
think
I
I
kind of
would.
figured you would.
I would, just because I feel like I would have an opportunity. I don't know if I go full Mark
You would
Driscoll
end
on
up
it.
in front of an audience that you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to preach the
Exactly.
gospel to.
And I would hope they would go, oh, I want to listen to that guy's podcast and I want to listen to whatever. Or
But how
I
do
wanna
you-
preach to that guy? And then I'd have an impact beyond that moment. That would be my hope.
How do you put aside your differences with the stuff that's going on?
So that's where, okay, so in some cases, this is where you go, that's a preference thing, that I personally probably wouldn't have at my church, but that's I probably wouldn't have a stripper on a pole. Just wouldn't go there.
Wouldn't have a stripper.
Wouldn't probably have Jello wrestling. Probably not
Exactly.
going to do that. But I wouldn't mind being able to talk to non-believers who showed up there. I'd be all for that.
I guess maybe to your question is, how do you, and this is a good question for you to answer, how do you discern who to be seen associated to?
Is this kind of more of a political playing politics? I mean, by I'm not going to address this directly. I'm going to say something maybe on the side or in my sermon that would maybe open up the minds of the leaders of this organization.
So I've for example, poetry slams. I used to be before I was pastoring and I was in the Army, which was really fun. I would be the weirdest looking guy at the poetry slam because I'd have a haircut. Anyway, I remember this one time I'm at this poetry slam and these guys are completely out there, atheistic, agnostic, saying sex, drugs, rock and roll in their thing. And then I get up there and I share the gospel. And I'll never forget this dude wearing, he must have been, it was like year 2000. The guy had this jean jacket vest with jeans and had pins, looked like he was from Vietnam, and pins all over the place. And then he follows me out into the parking lot. I'll never forget this. And I thought he wanted to fight me because I just shared the gospel. And he looks at me and he's angry. And I'm like, okay, we're doing this. We're going, I guess we're fighting right here.
But Jesus tells you to turn the other cheek.
And he goes, I just want to let you know something. You've got balls. And I was like, thanks. And I was so confused. I just shared the gospel. Anyway, so does that give me an opportunity, especially if there's I would kind of gauge how many lost people are going to be there at this thing. How many people that are far from God that are going to be here. I would kind of, it's different in every sort of thing. If I had to follow the sword swallower, that might be a little challenging, but I would definitely kind of go at it with okay, I would preach the message I was there to preach and share the gospel and hope that somebody there that didn't know God and maybe they came for some sword swallowing and they left with the gospel. I don't know. I think that's where I think in that circumstance, I would probably never host it, but I would probably preach at that. And I'd have to go, would I be able to maintain my own testimony there? I think they're John MacArthur recently was criticized because he was on the stage, I think, with somebody. And then he I shouldn't have been on that stage with that guy because I kind of gave validity to that guy. And I don't know if you're giving validity to that guy. And maybe I'm not, this is where it's nobody knows who I am, so it doesn't matter. And so that's tough. If you're at a level of John MacArthur and you're on the stage with, I don't know, somebody from Bethel, are you going to be ruining your witness?
Right. And I guess there the context matters. Are we doing this as a debate, bringing different theological views, or are we presenting we're a united front? Because, would you...
Yeah.
So, Bethel, T.D. Jakes, Paula White.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Oof. Yeah. Because I would want to speak to the audience that they're speaking
100%.
to. So I think there'd be a part of me where and I think I've seen this at a lot of events where the guy that was more Vodi Bakum spoke at Andy Stanley's church. And I fell in love with Vodi Bakum because he was at Andy Stanley's church.
We don't need the Old Testament or post?
No, that was probably around Unhitch Yourself, but Vodi was there. And he spoke to the young adults and it was mind-blowingly awesome. So
Vodi's
really
been willing to speak at a lot of places, and he carries a certain gravitas where, he never pulls a punch from the stage.
Never.
Ever. So I think he already has a platform. When he steps on, you already know he is not affirming anybody else on that stage.
Mark Driscoll, we obviously know he'll speak anywhere. Mark Driscoll spoke at the Crystal Cathedral, which, shortly after I spoke there, and I was like, wow. That was when he was lead pastor at Mars Hill, and he spoke at the Crystal Cathedral, which is positive thinking kind of messages. And he brought the gospel and they loved it. And I was like, it blew my mind. So I was like, I don't want to miss an opportunity to speak the gospel to an environment where somebody might not hear it and they've been exposed to all these other wacky things. Yeah. I would love to speak truth in that, even at the cost of someone might think I'm associated with those people. Just I feel like Jesus felt like he was associated with the sinners because he ate with the sinners. And it's really the only cost is your reputation, honestly.
Yeah. No, 100%. And so I think that's really good. So let's jump back into the craziness because it keeps getting crazy.
Okay, yeah. I think this is where this is why I call you the Christian culture update guy or expert, because you follow these stories all the way to the ground. I'm kind of like on the next one.
Yeah. So on top of this, there's two different directions. We'll go with the one that kind of in chronological order.
Yeah.
Justin Peters, who's I think he's been involved with a number of like the Gospel Projects.
Yep.
Not the Gospel Project, but like
the Gospel Project is like a children's ministry curriculum.
Yeah,
the
some
Gospel
of the documentaries
Project
he's reformed. Super solid.
Yep.
Definitely like as far away from charismatic as you can get. More like in the vein of a John MacArthur.
A cessationist.
Yes.
Yep.
So he had a podcast in review of the Stronger Men's thing and brought in a guy who was security at John MacArthur's Strange Fire.
Oh, when Mark Driscoll showed up?
Driscoll showed up.
Woo!
And apparently, goes into a whole bunch of background of where security supposedly confiscated Pastor Mark's books and did all this, and they told Mark to take his books and the security, and then he goes, "No, you guys can just have them." The security team still took the box and put it in Mark's car, basically making it seem the biggest problem is that there's all these people saying different things without a real. But that podcast was alleging that Mark was doing things to drum up social media, drum up the news.
I mean,
attention.
That's his thing.
That was his thing. So I'm like, I
love Mark Driscoll, and then I'm like, Mark, why? Why?
You don't need that.
You don't need it. You're so good without all the other garbage. Just be you. And you don't, and I think this, is that fear? Is that like a need for attention? I don't know what that is. And I get wanting to sell books. I get wanting to make a splash and impact. And clearly he was on the news all the time. He was interviewed by all the big, secular people. But somewhere along the line, I felt like Mark stopped pastoring and just was looking to, I don't know.
I don't know what he was looking for because he was arguably as big as you could get.
As big as you could get.
He was the face of Young, Restless, and Reformed.
Yep.
Started Acts 29.
Yep.
I mean, they were doing massive church.
And now Acts 29 is egalitarian.
Yeah. It's insane where that went. And Mark was already big, and his books were already selling when the Strange Fire Conference thing happened.
But here's the thing, and maybe I think I've probably done, this is where Adrian, my wife, would say, Chris, like in my past, I've probably matured some, but I would do that. I would want to kind of create a something because in me was like, if I don't, no one will. Like and then she would say, you don't need that. And I'd be like, fine, And so I think that might have been just spiritual immaturity. And Mark had cast away anyone who would speak into his life like that. And if you surround yourself in the echo chamber of like, do it. It'd be great if you did that. Then he's just like, yeah, maybe that's what God's calling in my life.
That's a funny statement, the echo chamber. That's what we're calling groupthink now?
Yeah.
The echo chamber? Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a horrible idea if you don't have somebody that will say, wait a minute, in your organization at any level that you're starting.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote reports on this in college.
Pastor Chris, do you have anybody in your life that's able to push back and say, hey, and what about this? Or are you thinking about that?
Yeah, well, thankfully, the elder board does a pretty good job of that. We were just talking about my review this morning.
Fun.
And, those always haven't gone well. But you know what? They're needed. And I think it's funny. Anytime someone looks at your life, they're going to find stuff that's not pretty, and I don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
I don't like it when people go, you have pride, you don't think before you speak, you don't blah, 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 you should have known. Oh, boy, you led this wrong, you said that wrong, you did that, whatever, and you're just like, oh, Lordy. And you really have to, the question then becomes, am I the crazy person? Or are they? Which one is it? And
it's really easy to rationalize all your own thoughts.
So easy.
I still remember early on, we were talking, and you made the comment. It can be very challenging as a professional. I like to use the term professional Christian, as the one who went to seminary,
right,
and then submit to yourself to a board of elders who have not.
Right, and it's super hard. But and there are other churches that I'm really close with that they have only professional elders, professional Christian elders, and they would say, why would I? And they said that exact thing. Why would I submit myself to someone who isn't a professional Christian? And I was like, and over the years, and again, I'm not saying that their way is wrong and our way is right. I'm just saying over the years, I think it's really benefited me to not go down to this like very narrow niche of people to be elders who are paid Christians you can then also look into self-interest of, one of the things that's been really special of our elders. They said, we have a responsibility to the urban poor here because of where God has placed us. And not that I don't care about poor people, but I wasn't thinking along those lines that we have made a difference here. And I think you would say, yeah, you're making a difference wherever you are, but one of the reasons why we have this desire to leave a church plant here in Wells Branch is one of the elders stood up and said, guys, look at all the urban poor we are ministering to. Look at how our benevolence ministry has impacted lives. Look at how many people have gotten saved. Look at the difference we've made. The community knows that where our church is and that we will help them because we're here. And I was just like, I guess you're right. And then you're like, oh yeah, of course, that's what we're supposed to do. And then then all of a sudden your heart kind of grows in that direction. You're like, absolutely, we need to be on the front lines of loving the least of these, because isn't that what Jesus did? And I might not contextually connect the best with people who are trying to figure out how to make rent each week, because I grew up, upper middle class, kind of had college was always going to happen. That was definitely in the cards. I never thought like that. And then all of a sudden now you put me in this context. I'm like, oh, I need to love, serve, and care for those who didn't grow up like I grew up, wasn't trained like I was trained, and to help them lift up urban poor, because the gospel always lifts up the poor. And so I think that's where that would challenge me in a really powerful way. Whereas if I had a lot of people that were group thinking along, I probably would have been like, yeah, let's get out of here. And so because of that, God has really burdened my heart and burdened my heart, soul to really love. We have homeless guys living out behind the church, behind the dumpster. We minister to those people, and the gospel is just as applicable to them, and I'm going to minister it just as equally to them as I would to anybody else. And that was really convicting for me, being in an elder meeting. It was powerful.
Yeah, and I think
Well, I want to speak on that just a little bit, because I can only conceive that in a way it's humbling to have people that aren't professional Christians on your elder board.
Yep.
And I think it keeps your scope more or less to the people that come to the church,
right,
and not just this is the what's good for the association, right?
Or what's good for the church, right? Like,
right.
Like you want to have the clean, pretty people. Make sure they're all here, and make sure the other people aren't. And like that. And I'm not saying that's what only Christians would do, but because I don't want to paint like professional Christians as like these monsters. But what I do want to say is, like, when you have perspective that's different, and it opens your heart and your eyes to what God is doing, and you see it, because sometimes you can feel like, I just ministered to these people and it didn't do a thing. Like, you're like, it made no difference. Yeah. And then someone goes, well, actually, boom, 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 boom. What about this? And you're like, oh yeah, I guess it did make a difference.
What about this?
Yeah. And so
what if you had two sets of elders, kind of like a House of Commons, and so you had the non-professional elders, then the professional elders? Will that just make a church way too bureaucratic, you think?
No, we have that. So you have pastors, are elders who are paid elders.
Oh, okay. So you kind of have that system.
They just don't vote on stuff.
Okay.
So therefore they're not
okay, they're not. Right. You have a governing board of elders which make the decisions, which I'm one of them. But there's 6 other guys who are not paid they're all volunteer. And the amount of hours that they put in is probably equal to the amount of hours I put in outside of work hours. Does that make sense?
Wow.
So like there's like your typical 40-hour-a-week job, but then there's another 20 hours a week that goes into taking care of the needs of the church and doing church things and, like, hey, doing weddings and doing funerals and like community groups and discipleship groups and blah, 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 blah. All that stuff is like on top of that every elder that's a volunteer does. And they're doing finance meetings on a Sunday, it's wild to see how much volunteer lay people do on top of their regular job. And it just like there's not a harder worker than the elders of our church that have great perspective on what it means to be a Christian and be in full-time ministry. It's wild. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah. I like the unpaid elder model. To me, it feels more akin to what elder was traditionally through Old Testament. Like as you grew up in the community, you kind of come up through, you're an elder, you're wiser, you're older, and that's what you're kind of pressing back down upon. So, and I think it's good.
But within respect, right? Because we can't just pick any old person to be like, you're wiser, because
absolutely. We all know that's not true.
Yeah. Correct.
You'd be a really set in your ways old person that's sinful.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah.
I could think of a few of them.
Yeah. Okay. So there was that piece with some extra. So Mark is not new to even presenting facts in a different light, maybe. So that's playing a role into this. And then the most recent thing I've seen is Pastor John at, I think it's a midweek service, came out and started talking about how their church, their denomination are receiving like death threats, and Mark was texting his son and things going dark there, and it's just like, again.
Wait. Hold on.
Yeah.
Like, slow down. So like the death threats were to.
So James River Church had to shut down their switchboard and not take any calls because the admins were taking death threats.
Wow.
John said he was over preaching in Arizona, which really hilarious since that's where Mark Driscoll preaches now. But he was in Arizona, and so was the Assemblies of God superintendent.
Right.
I don't really understand
their ecclesiology,
their hierarchy.
Yeah.
But they also that guy commented to John that at the Assemblies of God headquarters, they're receiving death threats and also had to shut their switchboard down and not take any calls. So things are going really crazy all across, which also it's like, how did we escalate to that type of thing? All of this is being said by
And the other thing I
John.
think is weird is that people are actually using phones to call. But anyway, that's probably another thing. And they have switchboards. Okay, yeah.
So my issue here is this is John saying this from the stage and then mentioning also and just flat out stating this is what Driscoll texted in. Nowhere does he show any of these text messages, nor does he provide proof of any of the phone calls. And since we know John is not big on showing proof with the toes thing, it's like, oh my gosh, what?
So what he was saying, he was getting death threats because of this, but there's no evidence to support the death threat thing.
But he wasn't willing to present anything, show anything. So, yeah, the story continues.
I feel like it's a challenging, again, this is where so I did live, I don't know, the Christian celebrity life, like as a, small little small person that just happened to be on TV shows a bunch in a former life. But it is different as a pastor of a church when you have that much limelight on you. It can be really challenging. And so I don't know what Pastor John is going through on all that, but it's probably really difficult to navigate. And so you say stuff. I don't know if he's embellishing it. Man, that's a tough thing to even kind of speculate on without any evidence or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's lying, but when someone starts talking about how the switchboard had to be shut down, I automatically go like, "You have a switchboard?" And then my second thing is like, most people are keyboard warriors today, and I wouldn't doubt that people are like saying a bunch of ridiculous stuff on social media. But man, it's sad if that's true. How sad that is.
100%.
It's like that's wild.
To me, it's somewhat the controversy breeds controversy, and that type of people just kind of seem to attract themselves.
And is
to
this
others.
where Mark Driscoll is dying for another thing?
Yeah,
because you got to know that when Mark Driscoll's not dumb, he knows that when he goes and speaks somewhere, that whoever is videoing it is going to do like 8 billion little hot takes or whatever.
He got caught with not caught. That's a terrible term. Ben Shapiro from Daily Wire, who's massive within right-wing politics, he did a reaction to a Driscoll sermon.
Interesting.
Talking about men, and at the end of it, Ben Shapiro goes, "Yep, 100%. I probably would have lowered the age of where guys need to stop being with their mom and start being with their dad."
Right.
But he's like, "Yeah." And then
they had an age for that?
Well, bar mitzvah, that's kind of the whole thing that you do.
Bar mitzvah, 12 or 13.
12.
Is it 12?
Mm-hmm.
And then military's not service until 20.
Right.
So.
Oh, we're talking about Israel now.
Israel.
Yeah. So
Shapiro's still Orthodox
20?
Judaism.
And he's legit. Like he follows the law, which is wild.
Yeah, still Orthodox.
That's so. At one time, I was talking to a guy who's from England, and not too long ago, like we're talking the 80s, he was like 16 in '89, and he got in the English Army at 16. Because unlike here, we're it's 18 till you graduate and make those decisions. In England, you can make those decisions at 16. Granted, mom still had to like sign away.
Sure.
Dad
Well, I mean, it's 17.
The U.S. was 17 with
but still, I was like 16.
Yeah,
and he was like, and I was like, good God.
So interesting, you bring that up. I've got a complete pivot from the Driscoll thing. Got a question for you though. IDF, it's conscription now. You must serve 2 years.
That's the Israeli Defense Force, yes?
Yes.
You must serve 2 years.
Yep.
Old Testament Israel, you cannot be forced to serve.
Right.
Where did the change happen?
I think they needed people.
Exactly.
So remember,
war happens?
Israel today doesn't exactly follow the Torah, right? But do I think they're a remnant of that Israel? Yes, I do. As a good dispensationalist, I totally do.
But they don't conscript until age 20.
Right. And they conscript
I don't know
women.
today. That's Old Testament was military.
That was a great point. They conscript women.
So I'm kind of like...
also a problem.
Yeah, I'm just like, guys. Now...
When you throw out God's law.
Yeah, when you... So it's like, it kind of reminds me of Israel during Jeroboam the first and Jeroboam the second's reign. It was Israel, and God still interacted and gave them favor, but they were doing evil on the side of the Lord and ultimately lost, their land. Now, I don't know how God's going to ultimately end things with them this time around. I mean, it's been 1948. It was like 2,000 years since they were a thing.
Yeah.
And you could even say 3,000 years since they were a thing, since Israel was a nation, and then the temple gets destroyed in 70 AD. Anyway,
I was gonna say they kind of haven't been.
But
since
at this point in time, I'm at a question as a Christian. Like you look in the Old Testament, and the Jews are God's people, but then they kill the Messiah.
Right.
So are they still God's people? Are they still going to go to the same heaven that I'm going to?
Well, how do you remember? You also killed Jesus. I think that's the part that we got to remember, is that we've all taken part in the death, burial, but then also in the resurrection of Jesus.
But are they still part of the new covenant after Jesus' death?
If they believe that Jesus died on the cross, if their hope was in the Messiah. I think that what's really hard is, remember, if you saw the miracles of Jesus and you're like, nah, it's Satan, you're going to hell.
Right.
But if you saw the miracles of Jesus, said, my hope is in the Messiah, that's my guy, you were saved. And so what the Pharisees did in that time, they saw the miracles of Jesus and they said, that's Satan. And so they ascribed to Satan the acts of Christ, which is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit.
But when I talk to some of the older Jewish people that I know, Like they have a completely different mindset than
Right, but
I
that
do
means
about Jesus.
they're just like a regular lost person now that God might reveal himself to, and that would be amazing.
Okay.
But it's salvation is by grace through faith in Christ the Messiah.
When Muslims in the Middle East are seeing Jesus' face in their dreams and getting it, I guess we can, pray for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I think
Well, I do want to go back to you with I kind of want to land the plane on our
on
culture
Driscoll?
experience with Driscoll
Gosh.
and Lindell.
So, I mean, right now, the thing is up in the air. I think there's still far more to come out with where things go from here with the text messages and all that to go down. I think the big takeaways are, we kind of asked some of them along the way of, Pastor Chris, what would you do in this situation? And there was an earlier podcast that you did talking about church planners, and one of the items that you're looking for is futuring.
Mm-hmm.
I think Protestant Christianity has done, in general, a terrible job of futuring that,
Expansion.
like, big time, in sense of we had no plan if something like COVID happened. And I'm not saying COVID, but what do you do if the government tells you to close down?
Yeah.
So we didn't need to anticipate COVID, but we should have anticipated
Something.
what do you do if the government says
You can't
you
meet.
need to close your doors, you can't meet.
Yeah.
John MacArthur stood up and said no, even in the state of California, which is ballsy, if to quote your your poetry person.
Yeah.
So it's things like that. It's how do we deal with, we've had to deal with critical race theory. We've had to deal with the LGB moving into the
I felt
like,
personally not equipped to deal with the critical race theory. There was such a learning curve for me that I was behind, and I felt bad that I was behind, but I just, it just was, I just did not do a good job with that. I wish that again, and I don't know if that's, how do you, and maybe we should have seen that coming. But I didn't.
How could we have seen it going? How could you wake up one day in America and I'm just going to say this, and racism is now, well, it's okay to be racist against white people.
Right.
I'm just going to state it.
Yeah.
But you can't be racist if you're not white. Like, who even? How does that work?
The white fragility, and it took me reading White Fragility to really understand the premise. It took me kind of going back to liberation theology with Tom Skinner. Like, I had to go back to origins, and it took just forever for me to catch up on like seeing. And Vodi Bakum really helped me with sort of seeing like the oppressor oppressed sort of mindset that came from a Marxist background that is primarily kind of making sure that everyone. Who's the oppressor? Oh, white people. Who are the oppressed? Everybody not white. So that's the enemy. Fight against the system. And so I didn't fully see all that. And because to be fair, there was a time in this country, now we're going to a whole different rabbit hole, but where you could not buy property, or when land was gifted out by the United States government, it was gifted out to white people. And then it wasn't gifted out to black people. And so that was a problem. But then how you solve the problem, that's the part where I don't think we did a good job of, there was an issue, and then what do you do with it, and how do you go forward? And I thought it was ill-equipped for that. And that's, so to your point, I think we didn't have a good enough background to be able to combat a lot of the Marxist ideas that got in, and we didn't have the ability to think as a Christian critically about all the different problems that our country has had, and then what solutions might look like in the future. Because for the most part, I think me as a Christian was like, I don't want to say stay out of politics, but like, I'll leave my politics to just voting for someone who doesn't support abortion. Right? Like, that was about it. But I wasn't thinking like, what's moral law look like?
But there's a lot more that went on in this. One, we had McCarthyism, right? Which was kicking a lot of them out of different areas. Now the Marx then attack the schools, and that's how you see the education system. And no offense to
but
teachers.
I don't want to go because I feel like this is a future.
Well,
podcast
this is a big rabbit hole.
So but to your point, was I prepared? No.
And and that is, but it's not just you.
Right.
That is one gift that the Catholic Church continues to give and they've got the manpower to do it.
Right.
So they're able to put out
theologians.
papers and think through these things. And oftentimes it's still reactionary there as well, but they've got the manpower to sit there and think through it. Now, yes, that happens.
How do you say the Catholic Church is an enemy against Marxism when they were all about putting Joe Biden?
Don't go down that road, but they do have the manpower to like, they have an institution that's big enough to, hey, what's our position on Marxism? And they can write out their position. What's our position on homosexuality and marriage and anthropology? And whereas with Protestants, we're all divided up with our little seminaries, and even the seminaries aren't really connected to churches unless you're SBC. But it's challenging. I think you're bringing up the right point, is like, because we're so splintered, in many ways we champion that. Like we have that American sense of like rugged individualistic churches. On the problem side of it is we're so splintered, we can't pool resources to get like, hey, who are the people that we think could best think about this and come up with a position for us?
Yeah. And we've seen it over time. There's been times the Westminster Confession, the London Baptist Confession, things like the Danvers Statement, the Nashville Statement. So it happens,
but then
at
even
times.
the London Baptist Confession, it's all about how the Pope's the Antichrist, and you're like, and then they have to be like, oh, well, he could be an Antichrist. You know, like I was like,
because
right.
they didn't put the article.
Maybe
in there.
we
It doesn't
should
say an or the.
Right.
What do we do?
Maybe we should try to figure a way how to stop all this division. We're all Christians after all, right?
Once you splinter, it's almost impossible to put it back in the box.
Unless you're John Smith and can go into a garden and the angel Moroni can come to you and tell you that all of them have got it. Joseph Smith. Sorry, yes.
Smith.
John Smith.
Yeah, you had me lost. So it was
Joseph
like,
Smith
we're going back to Pocahontas?
gets the discs and now tells you that all the denominations got it.
Oh, let's
Right.
not bring up Mormons
Like
today.
this,
I don't want to go down
it is
that
the
rabbit hole.
challenge, but I think there are things that can unite us and that we can.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I think we have to have that. I mean, John
but we
17 reality. I think there's this thing next year called it's the 100th anniversary of the Nicene Creed, and so they're trying to bring all the churches together that believe in. No, the Apostles' Creed. The Apostles' Creed. It's the 1700th anniversary of the Apostles' Creed, and I'm like, I love it, but there's a lot of churches that I probably would disagree with that are going to be a part of that, and that becomes the big question: do I sign up for that?
Do you?
But I do affirm the Apostles' Creed.
Right. So that becomes we can
unifier,
affirm this,
right? Yeah.
But then it takes subsequent ones. All that to say,
Yep.
futuring and thinking through, understanding who you're going to associate with, who you're going to share a stage with, understanding the limelight and the controversies that can come. I think that's the relevance behind following Christian culture and understanding what's going on is, any one of us could go down one of those wrong paths
Right.
if we don't have a board of elders or
Yep.
in your life a board of elders of mentors that can speak into your life and tell you, hey, you're doing this wrong, or hey, you need to check your blind spot.
Yep.
That's what we need, and that's why Christian culture, it gives us a light into what is happening across Christianity today.
Well, hey, I just want to tell everyone thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, we're bringing our Christian culture expert back, Chris Bowers. He's always got his thumb on his phone on the latest happening of what is going on in Christian culture. So, Chris, we need to have you back. You think you can make it back next week for the latest update?
We'll try. If there's not an update on that one, we'll see if we can.
Yeah,
find
we're gonna listen. There's always something, and
There is
so
always
the 24-hour news cycle affects Christianity as well, and we want to make sure that we give you the latest and greatest of how we should be as Christians thinking about faith, culture, and everything in between. Hey, thanks for watching. Drop a text 737-231-0605 or go to pastorplek.com of whatever question you have talking about faith, culture, or anything in between. We'd love to hear from you. From our house to yours, have an awesome week of worship.